In the heart of a vast and ancient forest, where towering trees stretched high into the sky and the earth smelled of moss and wildflowers, lived Luca, a bear whose life was as solitary as the forest itself. He roamed the wilderness alone, a shadow among the trees, his massive frame moving silently through the underbrush. Luca was a creature of habit, following the rhythms of nature with quiet precision. He had no need for companionship, for he had learned long ago that the forest was all he required. It was a place of peace, of solitude, and of strength. The forest was Luca's world. The seasons changed around him, but he remained a constant presence, knowing exactly where the best streams were for fishing, where the richest berry bushes grew, and where the softest beds of moss could be found for rest. He had mastered the art of survival, his instincts guiding him through every season. Spring brought a bounty of fresh leaves and tender shoots. Summer offered abundant fish and fruits, while autumn filled the forest with the earthy scent of falling leaves and ripened berries. Winter, though harsh, was something Luca had come to accept with resilience. He would retreat to his den, a hollowed-out cave deep within the forest, where he could sleep through the cold months, content and undisturbed. Luca's life had never known the warmth of friendship or the joy of companionship. He had seen other animals come and go, some in packs and others alone, but he never felt the need to join them. His thoughts were his own, his space untouched by the presence of others. There was something deeply fulfilling about the quiet, the stillness of the forest that Luca had come to love. The solitude was his sanctuary, a place where he could exist without worry, without the noise of others. He had no memories of family, no recollection of his mother or father. From a young age, Luca had learned to fend for himself, growing strong and independent. His days were filled with purpose, and his nights were spent beneath the stars, listening to the calls of distant owls and the rustle of the leaves as the wind danced through the trees. He had never known loneliness, only the deep satisfaction of being self-sufficient. To Luca, the forest was everything. It was a constant, unwavering companion, providing him with food, shelter, and a place to call his own. The quiet life he led was not one of sadness, but of contentment. He had everything he needed, except perhaps something he had never even considered. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Luca found himself wandering near the edge of the woods. It was a part of the forest he didn't frequent often, a place where the trees gave way to an open meadow, and the cool evening breeze carried the faint scent of the distant mountains. Luca, despite his usual preference for the deeper, quieter parts of the forest, felt an inexplicable pull toward this unfamiliar stretch of land. His large paws moved quietly across the soft earth, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The woods were peaceful, but something felt different this time. A faint sound reached his ears, something soft and pleading, like the delicate mewing of a creature in distress. At first, Luca thought it was just the wind stirring the leaves, but the sound grew clearer, more urgent. Curiosity piqued. Luca followed the sound, his large body moving through the tall grasses. As he reached the edge of the meadow, he froze. There, nestled in a small patch of soft grass, was a tiny, shivering kitten. The little creature was no larger than the palm of Luca's massive paw, its fur a muted shade of autumn leaves. The kitten's tiny body trembled against the chill of the evening air, its eyes wide and filled with fear. It was clear that the kitten was weak, its breathing shallow and labored. Luca hesitated for a moment. His first instinct was to turn away, to continue on his solitary path. But something within him stopped him. The sight of the helpless kitten stirred something deep in his heart, something Luca had never experienced before. It was an instinct to protect, to care. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be needed. The kitten's green eyes locked onto Luca's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The little feline didn't flinch in fear, as most animals would when faced with such a large creature. Instead, it gazed up at Luca with a quiet trust, as though it somehow knew that he meant no harm. Luca felt a strange connection in that moment, a silent understanding between two creatures who had never met, yet found something in each other's gaze that spoke volumes. Luca took a slow step forward, his huge form moving cautiously, not wanting to startle the fragile kitten. His voice rumbled low in his chest, though it was soft, almost soothing. "What are you doing here, little one?" he muttered, though he didn't expect an answer. The kitten's only response was a faint, pitiful mew. Luca's heart softened even further. He lowered his head to the ground, his massive nose gently nudging the tiny kitten. The kitten barely moved, but it let out a weak purr as if acknowledging Luca's presence. It was a sound so soft and faint that it seemed to tug at something deep within him. With great care, Luca bent down and gently scooped the kitten up in his large, warm paws. He cradled it against his chest, the small body trembling but now safe in his grasp. For the first time in years, Luca felt something other than solitude. He felt a strange sense of purpose, as though he had been given the opportunity to care for something that needed him. "Don't worry," Luca whispered, his deep voice soothing. "I'll take care of you." The forest seemed to hush around them as Luca turned and made his way back to his den. He was carrying something precious now, something he hadn't known he needed, but that had found its way into his heart. As the trees closed in around him, Luca felt a quiet warmth settle in his chest, a warmth that had been absent for so long. As the days passed, Luca kept the tiny kitten, whom he had named Autumn, close to him. He'd built a nest for them both inside his den, a cozy refuge nestled deep within the heart of the forest. The den was tucked away beneath the roots of a giant oak tree, its hollowed-out interior offering shelter from the biting winds that swept through the trees in the cooler months. Autumn, still weak and fragile, rested beside Luca every night, her tiny body curled into a ball against his warm, furry side. Luca, ever the protector, had become more than just a caretaker. He had become a guide, a steady force in the kitten's life. He would spend hours gently nudging her to eat, even when she lacked the strength to do so. His immense paws, though capable of crushing stone, were careful as they laid down pieces of fish and berries before her. Luca had never been one for patience, but with Autumn, something in him had changed. He took his time, watching her closely, waiting for her to gather the strength to eat. It was as if he understood that this was more than just a process of nourishment. It was a delicate dance, a healing of the spirit as much as the body. Slowly, Autumn began to show signs of recovery. Her fur, once dull and unkempt, started to gleam in the sunlight that filtered through the trees. Her once fragile limbs grew stronger, and her bright green eyes regained the spark of curiosity. Every day, she ventured a little further out of the den, testing her strength, as Luca watched over her with unwavering attention. He had become not just her protector, but her teacher, guiding her through the steps of survival in the wild. "Come on, little one," Luca would say gently, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Let me show you how to catch the fish from the stream." Autumn would look up at him, her tail flicking with determination, and try her best to mimic his every move. At first, it was a clumsy affair, her small paws splashing water everywhere as she tried to catch the fish. But Luca was patient, teaching her how to move with quiet grace, how to wait for the right moment. It was a strange thing for the bear, who had spent most of his life hunting alone. Yet with Autumn, there was no impatience, no hurry. He was content to show her how it was done, to guide her as she learned. Over time, Autumn's playful spirit began to emerge. She would chase after the falling leaves, her small paws batting them into the air, a flicker of joy that filled the forest with a sense of life. Luca would watch her with a soft smile, a rumbling chuckle escaping him whenever she managed to catch one of the leaves between her tiny claws. Though her body was small, her energy was boundless, and it filled Luca with a warmth he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. As Autumn grew stronger, so did their bond. The little kitten had become Luca's family in ways he never expected. She had brought light into his once solitary life, teaching him that the heart could grow in ways he had never known possible. In return, Luca shared his wisdom of the forest, teaching Autumn how to climb trees, how to hide in the tall grasses when danger approached, and how to navigate the world with quiet confidence. But even more than the lessons of survival, Luca taught Autumn something deeper, something that had been missing from his own life for so long. He taught her about the quiet joys of companionship, about the peace that came from simply being in the presence of someone you trusted. Autumn, in turn, taught Luca to embrace vulnerability, to open his heart to the possibility of love, even when it seemed like a foreign concept. There were moments, quiet moments, when Luca would rest beneath the canopy of trees and Autumn would curl up beside him. In those moments, surrounded by the peace of the forest, they both understood something that transcended words. They were no longer alone. The healing process wasn't just for Autumn, it was for Luca too. The bear, once content in his solitude, had begun to realize that there was more to life than surviving. There was joy in companionship, in sharing moments of stillness and laughter. Autumn had taught him that in the most unexpected way. And in the process, Luca found that healing wasn't always about fixing what was broken. It was about finding connection, even when it seemed impossible. As the seasons began to shift, with autumn's golden hues giving way to the crisp white of winter, the bond between Luca and Autumn grew even stronger. What had started as a simple act of kindness, the bear's quiet decision to protect the small, trembling kitten, had evolved into something much deeper. They were no longer two creatures coexisting in the same forest. They had become something more, an inseparable pair whose lives were intertwined in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Luca had always been a solitary creature, comfortable in his own company, content to wander the vast expanse of the forest alone. But with Autumn by his side, everything changed. He found himself looking forward to the mornings when the first light of dawn would filter through the trees, casting a soft glow over the snow-covered forest floor. Autumn, now much stronger and brimming with curiosity, would be waiting beside him, her bright eyes sparkling with excitement. They would set off together, exploring the vast wilderness that had once been Luca's alone. It wasn't just the shared moments of adventure that deepened their connection. It was the small, everyday things. Luca, who had never known the comfort of a friend, began to realize that Autumn had become more than just a companion. She had become a part of his heart. He cherished the moments when she would curl up beside him in the evenings, the sound of her soft purring lulling him into a peaceful sleep. It was a kind of warmth that he had never experienced before, one that went beyond the physical heat of his thick fur. It was the warmth of love, of trust, and of an unspoken understanding. Autumn, for her part, had found in Luca not just a protector, but a teacher and a friend. She followed him everywhere, watching with rapt attention as he went about his daily routines, hunting, fishing, and gathering food. She learned quickly, absorbing every lesson he had to offer. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sharing their lives with each other, finding joy in the simple acts of being together. "Look, Luca!" Autumn would exclaim one afternoon as she pounced playfully at a fallen branch, her tiny paws batting at it with determination. Luca watched her with a soft smile, his eyes gleaming with pride. He had taught her how to be agile, how to move with the grace of a forest creature, and now she was learning on her own. The sight of her so confident and independent filled him with joy, a feeling he had never associated with his solitary existence. There were moments, too, when they would sit side by side in the quiet of the forest, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. Autumn would nestle against Luca, her small body a perfect fit against his broad side. They would remain there for hours, in the silence that only the deepest of friendships could create, listening to the gentle rustling of the leaves in the wind. These moments, more than anything else, solidified their bond. They weren't just surviving together. They were living, sharing, and growing together in ways that neither of them had ever known. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The forest, though beautiful, was still wild, and Luca and Autumn faced challenges along the way. One evening, as they were crossing a narrow stream, the water suddenly swelled, rushing faster than Luca had expected. Autumn, who had been trailing behind him, slipped and was swept away by the current. Luca's heart stopped in that moment, and he leaped into the water without hesitation. The current was strong, and the cold water bit at his fur, but Luca fought through the force of the stream, his powerful limbs propelling him toward Autumn, who was struggling to stay afloat. In a moment of sheer instinct, Luca reached her, his large paw grasping around her tiny form, pulling her close. The world seemed to freeze as Luca held her tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been so terrified in his life. But just as quickly as it had happened, the danger passed. Luca carefully brought Autumn to the shore, his body shaking from the cold, but his relief palpable as he checked that she was safe. Autumn looked up at him with wide eyes, her breath shallow but steady. "Luca," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You saved me." Luca's heart swelled with emotion, and he nuzzled her gently with his nose. "I'll always save you, Autumn. Always." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. It was more than just gratitude. It was the realization that their connection had grown beyond the surface. They had become more than just a bear and a kitten. They had become family. And as winter settled in, with its icy breath sweeping through the forest, Luca and Autumn found that they had everything they needed to face whatever lay ahead. Together. The winter winds howled through the trees, their eerie cries echoing across the vast forest. Luca and Autumn, as always, had retreated to the safety of their den, where the warmth of their shared presence kept the cold at bay. The fire that burned in their hearts, a connection neither had known before, seemed to keep the chill of the world outside from reaching them. Yet there were times when the weather, the storm itself, felt like it could break through their sanctuary. Tonight was one of those nights. The sky had darkened early that evening, the clouds swirling in ominous patterns above them. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, the wind picking up in a frenzy that made the trees sway and creak as if they were trying to escape the coming onslaught. Luca, ever aware of the weather, could feel the weight of the storm on his bones, the air charged with energy as the first heavy flakes of snow began to fall. Autumn, who had never experienced such a powerful storm, huddled against Luca's side. Her fur, once glossy and healthy, was now a little thicker, but still she trembled as the wind began to pick up. The sound of the storm outside, loud, wild, and untamed, frightened her. Though the den was a place of safety, the world outside seemed to be an entirely different one, full of threats and uncertainty. It was a world that Autumn had not yet learned to navigate with confidence despite the lessons Luca had taught her. "Luca," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I'm scared." Luca, who had always known the power of the forest, the strength of the storm, looked down at Autumn, his eyes soft yet steady. For the first time, the storm outside seemed more than just a simple change in weather. It felt like a symbol of something much greater. The unknown, the forces of nature that neither he nor Autumn could control. But Luca was not a bear to be afraid. He had always faced the wild with strength and courage. It was time to teach Autumn that the same strength lived within her, even if it was still untapped. He nuzzled her gently, his deep, comforting voice rumbling like a distant growl. "There is nothing to fear, little one. We are safe here, together. The storm cannot reach us." Autumn, though still frightened, found comfort in his words, in the steady thrum of Luca's heartbeat beneath her paws. She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with a mixture of trust and fear. "But what if the storm is too strong? What if we're not safe?" Luca in that moment realized just how far their bond had come. It was no longer just about survival. It was about protection, about being there for each other when the world outside seemed too overwhelming. And Luca, despite his stoic nature, had never felt more connected to another being than he did to Autumn. He had made a promise to himself the day he found her that he would protect her, no matter what. And this storm, as fierce and terrifying as it was, would not break the promise he had made. "I will always protect you," Luca said, his voice unwavering. "No matter what the storm brings, no matter what the world throws at us, I will always be here. You are my family, Autumn, and nothing will ever change that." Autumn pressed her tiny body closer to Luca's, the warmth from his fur enveloping her like a shield against the cold. She had never known such safety, such love. In the vast and wild world that Luca had shown her, she had found a home, a place where she was no longer just surviving, but living, thriving. As the storm raged outside, Luca and Autumn remained in the quiet of the den, the sound of the wind and snow muffled by the thick stone walls. The storm would pass, as all storms did, and when it did, they would step out into the world again, stronger for having weathered it together. In that moment, Autumn knew that as long as she had Luca, she had everything she would ever need. And Luca, in turn, knew that with Autumn by his side, his once solitary heart had found a new meaning, a new purpose. And so, as the storm raged outside, Luca made a promise, one that would echo in the heart of the forest, through the long winters and beyond. It was a promise not just to protect, but to love, to stand together against whatever the world might bring. As winter settled over the forest, a blanket of snow that seemed endless stretched across the land. Everything grew still. The cold, biting winds and the thick frost that clung to the trees made even the strongest of creatures pause. Yet in the heart of the forest, tucked away in their den, Luca and Autumn found warmth in each other's company. The bond they had formed over the months seemed unbreakable, and it was more than just a companionship. It was a love that transcended the coldest of seasons. However, despite the peace that had settled between them, Luca could feel a change in the air, a shift that had nothing to do with the weather. Autumn, the vibrant, curious kitten who had once pounced with endless energy, was no longer the same. She no longer chased after the falling leaves or played with the sticks Luca had thrown her way. Her once playful purrs were now rare, replaced with quiet sighs and a distant look in her eyes. The sparkle in her green eyes had faded, and it was becoming painfully clear to Luca that something was terribly wrong. At first, Luca thought it was just the cold of winter, that perhaps the harsh season was taking its toll on her. But as the days stretched into weeks, he could no longer deny it. Autumn was weakening. Her small frame, once filled with energy and life, was now thin and frail. Her once lush fur had lost its shine, and she shivered even in the warmth of their den. The playful glint in her eyes had been replaced with a look of weariness, as though she had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. Luca, ever the protector, was frantic. He gathered herbs from the forest, searched the streams for any food that might help strengthen her, but nothing seemed to make a difference. He would sit beside her, his great bare paws gently stroking her small head, as she rested her fragile body against his side. He whispered words of comfort, though his heart was breaking. He could not understand what was happening to her. He had watched her grow stronger, watched her become a capable, confident little companion. But now he could do nothing but watch as she grew weaker with each passing day. One evening, as the pale light of the setting sun filtered through the den's entrance, Luca noticed that Autumn was not in her usual resting spot. His heart clenched as he searched the den, finally finding her curled up in the farthest corner, her body still and unmoving. "Autumn?" Luca's voice trembled as he approached her. He nudged her gently with his nose, but she didn't respond. Panic surged through him as he nudged her again, more forcefully this time, but she barely stirred. Her small, delicate breathing was shallow, and her body felt cold against his touch. It was then that Luca knew the truth. The kitten he had once found trembling in the meadow was fading away, slipping from his grasp. He had protected her from every danger, from the wilds of the forest, from storms and threats, but there was nothing he could do now. The bond they had forged, the love they had shared, was coming to an end, and Luca's heart was shattered by the realization. "Don't leave me, Autumn," Luca whispered softly, his voice breaking. "Please don't leave me." Autumn opened her eyes slowly, her gaze weak but still filled with the same trust that had been there from the first moment they had met. She tried to lift her head, but it was a struggle. "I'm sorry, Luca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Luca's eyes were filled with tears, his heart aching with a depth of sorrow he had never known. He had never imagined that something so precious could be taken from him, that the tiny kitten who had filled his life with joy could slip away so quietly. "Don't apologize," Luca said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me everything, Autumn, more than I ever thought possible. You've given me love, a family, a reason to live beyond the solitude I once knew. I will never forget you." Autumn's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Luca's huge frame trembled as he lay beside her, his great head resting gently on her tiny form. He would not leave her side, not now, not when it seemed the most important. The hours seemed to stretch on, and in the quiet of the den, as the wind howled outside, Luca stayed with Autumn, whispering words of comfort, his tears falling softly onto her fur. He knew that he couldn't stop her from leaving this world, but he also knew that he would never let her go in his heart. She was a part of him, and always would be. As the evening faded into the deep silence of the night, Autumn's breathing grew slower, more faint. Her tiny body was at peace, her struggle over. With one final sigh, she relaxed against Luca, the weight of her spirit leaving him with a final, whispered, "I love you." Luca's heart shattered as he watched the life slip from her fragile form. He felt the loss as a deep ache, something that would never truly go away. But even in the pain of that moment, there was a sense of peace. Autumn had found her way into his life, had taught him the meaning of love, of connection, and of sacrifice. And though she was gone, she would never truly leave him. Luca stayed beside her for the rest of the night, his great form curled protectively around her, as if to hold on to the last remnants of the love they had shared. The forest outside seemed to hold its breath, the storm that had once raged now a distant memory, replaced by the soft, steady rhythm of Luca's heart. The days after Autumn's passing were an endless haze for Luca. The once vibrant world around him seemed muted, drained of its color and life. He had never truly understood the meaning of loss until now, and the weight of it was a constant presence, pressing down on his heart like an unrelenting storm. Autumn, his little companion, his family, was gone. And though her tiny body was no longer there beside him, her spirit seemed to linger in every corner of the den, in the soft rustle of the trees, in the quiet stillness that now filled his days. Luca spent his mornings alone, staring at the spot where Autumn had once played, where her tiny paws had left their mark in the dust of the den floor. He would hunt for food, but there was no joy in it anymore. The forest, once a place of solace and peace, now felt hollow. His steps were heavy, and his heart, once full of love and warmth, was now consumed with grief. The first night without Autumn was the hardest. Luca had always slept alone before, but now without her curled beside him, the silence seemed deafening. He lay on his side, his eyes wide open in the darkness, staring at the empty space where she had once slept. The cool air felt colder, the night darker, and Luca's own heart seemed to echo in the silence, a reminder of the emptiness that had settled in his chest. But despite the deep ache of loss, Luca knew that he had to say goodbye. He had to let go, not of the memories they had shared, but of the pain that had wrapped itself so tightly around his heart. Autumn had taught him so much, had given him a purpose beyond survival, and now in the quiet of the forest, Luca understood that her spirit would never truly leave him. She had changed him, shaped him, and in doing so, she had left a mark on his heart that could never be erased. One morning, as the sun broke through the trees, casting a soft golden light over the forest, Luca made his way to the edge of the meadow where he had first found Autumn. It was a place they had often visited together, a place of new beginnings, and now it seemed like the right place for Luca to find closure. The meadow, blanketed in fresh snow, was peaceful. The wind whispered through the branches of the trees, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Luca stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out across the landscape, his chest tight with emotion. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, his great body trembling as he let the memories of Autumn wash over him. The sound of her purring, the way she had looked up at him with trust in her eyes, the joy in her small movements. Those memories would stay with him forever. "I love you, Autumn," Luca whispered softly into the wind, his voice breaking. "You will always be in my heart." With one final, slow breath, Luca turned and walked to the small mound of earth he had prepared the day before. Gently, with the utmost care, he laid Autumn's tiny body to rest beneath the snow, a place of peace, surrounded by the beauty of the forest that had been her home. His large paws dug carefully into the earth as he gently placed her in the ground, his heart heavy but resolute. He sat by the grave for hours, watching the wind swirl the snowflakes in a delicate dance around him, as if nature itself was mourning the loss of the little kitten. Luca did not cry. There were no more tears left. But his heart was full of love, of grief, and of gratitude for the time they had shared. And as the day slowly turned to dusk, Luca rose to his feet and took one last, lingering look at the small grave. He whispered one final promise to the wind, to autumn, wherever she might be. "I will carry you with me always." With that, Luca turned and began his journey back into the forest, his steps now lighter, though still heavy with the weight of what had been lost. But the grief was no longer a burden. It was a part of him, as much a part of him as autumn had been. Her memory would live on in his heart, a constant reminder of the love they had shared. The forest once again felt like home. The trees whispered, the wind sang its song, and Luca, the great bear, continued his journey through the wilderness. But this time he was not alone. Autumn was with him, always in the spirit of the forest, in the rustling of the leaves, in the quiet moments of reflection. And though the pain of losing her would never fully fade, Luca had learned that love, like the forest, could endure beyond the seasons.